We're in chapter 22. And this will be our closeout week, talking about Father Abraham. And we've been talking about him for quite some time, and just the different things that God has showed and revealed about himself through the life of Abraham. Revealed about Abraham and how he lived before the Lord, how Sarah lived before the Lord. And as I read through Genesis and the Abraham accounts, I can't help but think that it's this telling of the story of Abraham and the things he went through, his struggles, his triumphs, his falls, his getting back ups, and all of that. But it's telling his story. But you can't help but see God in the story. And that's how I want my life to be. That's how I want when people just talk about having met or encountered me, I want God to be right in there. If anyone, I want God to be in there just like that.
Between these lines.
In between the line, woven into, that it'll be unmistakable.
See Jesus. Yes.
Because when you know that Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac showed up, Sarah was 90, barren, and all this and the other stuff. But at 100, she conceived and gave birth. Nobody but God. Nobody but God. When I tell my story, I want it to be like that. See Jesus. To know indeed that it was none but God. None but God. That's how I want my life, my story to reflect God. Amen. So here we are in chapter 22. Chapter 22 is the culmination, if you will, of everything where it comes to Isaac. I won't say the culmination because it's not the end, but it's a pretty significant peak in the timeline of Isaac. Because we have where he was born. Sarah sang a song. Sarah declared her laughter. That others might hear and join with her. She went from denied laughter to declared laughter. And now Abram, in his days, God showed up. And the word says to tempt Abraham. But it wasn't to tempt Abraham unto sin, unto falling, because God does not do that. God, his effort here is to try Abraham, to test Abraham with the ultimate test. Verse 1 of chapter 22 says, and it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and he said unto Abraham, and he said, behold, here I am. This is Abram responding to God. Behold, here I am. And he said, take now thy son, thine only son, Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of these mountains, which I shall tell thee of. You've waited 25 years for this promise to come about. Now you've had him, and he's grown, and he's to the point of a maturity level where you've had him in your household. Now you've enjoyed his presence and everything. But now I need you to take him up to the mountain and sacrifice him. It would have been one thing if he would have said it about the infant. Because he hadn't had him that long. No attachment. But at the age, because we know he's been weaned, because that was in chapter 21. He was weaned in chapter 21. So we know at least he's that age to where he's been weaned. And God said, okay, now, and he's speaking to Abraham. He says, thy son, thy only son, whom thou lovest, and get thee unto the mountain and offer him for a burnt offering. Not just turn him over to someone who's going to train him up, as Hannah offered Samuel before the Lord. But he's saying, God is saying, Abraham, offer him up as a burnt offering. And to me, verse 3 typifies who Abraham is. We know all the things Abraham went through. We know Abraham, when we get into this land, if anybody comes and asks, tell them you're my sister. We know that Abraham. We know that Abraham, but that's not how we view Abraham. We don't view Abraham by his moments of weakness. We view Abraham, he's a prophet, remember. And God told the king that he's a prophet and you will deal with him as a prophet. We got the same thing. We have that same responsibility. But this, verse 3, tells me a lot about Abraham. Where he said, God says, verse 2, and get thee into the land of Moriah and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. Verse 3, and Abraham rose up early in the morning, and he saddled his ass, and he took 2 young men with him, and Isaac his son. Abraham has the ear of the Lord. Abraham knows his boundaries. He knows his rights. He knows his abilities before the Lord. This is Abraham we're talking about. The same Abraham who, when he heard that wicked Sodom and Gomorrah was going to be destroyed, bargained with God on their behalf, knowing how sinful they were. It wasn't just Sodom and Gomorrah, but there was 5 cities worth of sin, debauchery, and everything else going on. And it wasn't just like, I don't say regular sin, but it's the manner in which the sin was being carried out, the openness and the blatancy with which it was being carried out before the Lord. That's what cried out. How open they were with it. How I don't care they were with it before the Lord. Didn't matter. This is how we do it. And Abraham pleaded for their lives. But when God tells Abraham, I need you to sacrifice Isaac,
on the other hand, wow.
the one whom he loves, his only son, Abraham rose up early in the morning. And he saddled his ass, and he took 2 of his young men and his son Isaac. He didn't bargain with God. He didn't plead for Isaac's life. He didn't barter. He didn't negotiate. He didn't fleece God. He didn't, is this really you, God? He just got up early in the morning to go take care of business. to be obedient. He got up early to be obedient. He didn't keep rolling over, hitting snooze, thinking, well, if I delay, if I hold up, if I hesitate, if I wait, maybe God will come back and say, nah, nah. Abram rose up early in the morning and got it done. He rose up early. He didn't. Wicked Sodom and Gomorrah, please on their behalf. What if there's 50 righteous? What if there's 45 righteous? What if there's 40? What if there's 30? 20? What if there's 10? And thinking 10's got to be good. Because Lot and his family are there. 10's got to be good. Then he went from the presence of the Lord. But with Isaac, he says, go sacrifice a burnt offering. Nothing but obedience. Rose up early in the morning. Rose up early in the morning. Ooh. I feel fairly safe in saying that we today might not have had that same response to God. We might have had a different reaction if we've waited for something for so long, and then it finally comes, and then we've had time to enjoy it, to become attached, get attached to, and then God says, "All right, now give it up." Not just give it up, not just send your son away, but give it to him. But not just giving it to him, giving his son unto God, but as a burnt offering, and knowing every step that is entailed in making Isaac a burnt offering. He rose up early, took his son, continuing in that verse, and he cleaved the wood for the burnt offering. He cut and gathered the wood, and he rose up and he went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. And then Abraham said unto his young men, abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. What sticks out about that declaration right there? They'll come again. That's significant. That they'll come again. But peep this. Abide ye here with the ass. Y'all wait here. And I and the lad will go yonder and worship. Abide ye here. Y'all wait here. The lad and I, we're going to worship. And then we'll be back. We'll be back. The lad and I are going to worship and come again to you. We're going to worship. That says volumes about Abraham. About what his heart set was. What his mindset was. What his default was. Yes, he had his moments of weakness. Yes, he had, it was a repeated thing. It was a time he did over and over and over again. But when it came down to it, when the rubber met the road, Abraham was about worship. Abraham was about obedience. Abraham was about getting it done for the Lord. Rubber meets the road. Wicked Sodom gets intervened for. Wicked Sodom and Gomorrah, they get bargained for. God says, offer Isaac as a sacrifice. Yes, Lord. No bargaining, no weeping, no questioning, simple compliance, simple obedience. And then when he gets to the place where he knows it has to go down, he says, the lad and I are going to go worship. He does, in his heart, He's saying, I have to obey the Lord. I'm going to obey the Lord. I'm going to do what the Lord says do. I'm going to do what the Lord says do. And as I'm going up to do it, as I'm telling these people why we're leaving them there, it's about worship. It's about worship. It's about loving on God for who he is. It's about loving on God because of everything that he has been to me. It's about worship. And then we're coming back. There's no sadness. There's no lamentation in his voice. There's no consternation. There's nothing negative that we get from reading this. He simply says, we're going up to worship. I'm doing what the Lord has commanded me to do. And I don't even get the feeling that Abram told anyone. I don't believe he even told Sarah. Because there's no way she would have let him go. There's no way she would have let him go. Or go alone. She would have wanted to go. She would have wanted to get in the way. Because it's her son too. She had to wait she had to wait 90 years. Well, not all 90, once she became childbearing. But she had to wait all of those years, knowing that she couldn't have a child. And then finally God blesses her. Finally, God opens up her womb. And at 90, she gives birth. And then brings him to the age where he's weaned. And now, God is telling Abraham to go sacrifice. Sarah being of great faith. Sarah being the one who got put into, at least on 2 occasions that we know of, into the possession, into the house of leaders, a Pharaoh and a king, and God protected her. But we do that though. We're okay as long as it's us going through. We can handle us going through, but don't mess with my son. Don't mess with my child. Don't mess with my family. See, Sarah, she might have tried to be that mama bear. Oh no, you don't. Oh no, you not.
Are you sure?
Abraham,
Yeah.
Are you sure it was God?
Yeah.
Did you really hear?
Yeah.
Because no.
Yes.
We don't know any of that for sure, but from the time, what we get is God told Abraham to do it. Abraham rose in early in the morning to do it. Verse 6. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and he laid it. And he laid it upon Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife. And they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood. But where is the lamb for burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for burnt offering. And so they went all together. God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. Abraham already knows that God's going to make a way. He wouldn't have been able to make that declaration at the bottom of the mountain that the lad and I are going up, we're going to worship, and then we're going to come back. He knows that whatever's going to go down up in that camp up there, God's going to get the glory. He knows that already going up there, that they're coming back down. So he doesn't know what's going to happen. He knows what he has to do.
Right.
He knows what he's going to do.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what God's going to do. He doesn't know how God is going to do it. But when Isaac asked him about a lamb, he's able to declare, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering.
Yeah.
he knows to declare that. He doesn't like, I don't know yet. He doesn't tell him, you're that lamb. He doesn't even say that.
Yes.
He puts the onus back on God.
Yes.
God will provide a lamb. Because Abraham is this is the penultimate trust test of how much you trust God.
Yes.
This is the ultimate test of how much he trusts God, because he's already made the declaration. We're coming back down the mountain. He doesn't know what's going to happen, but he knows what he has to do. He doesn't know what God's going to do. He doesn't know how God's going to do it, but he knows that him and his son are coming back down that mountain. He doesn't know if he's going to present him as a burnt offering and God's going to bring him back. He doesn't know if God's going to have a ram in the bush. But when he says God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering, he doesn't know if Isaac's going to be that lamb. See, Abram, as he's going up that mountain, he's already declared that they're going up to worship. So he's going up in a heart and a mindset of worship. He's not going up wondering what's going to happen. He's not wondering how it's going to happen. He's not pondering. He's not trying to figure out how it's going to happen. He's not trying to determine how it's going to happen. He's not trying to tell God what God has to do in order for this to happen.
Yes.
The way he thinks it ought to happen so that he can get the result that he wants. So that he can fulfill what's in his heart. What he wants in his heart. But Abram, in declaring that worship is going to go forward on this mountain, he's already demonstrated. He's already shown that what is in his heart, first and foremost, is God first. Is God first. By saying it, just being able to say, it just keeps coming back to me on that. I and the lad will go yonder to worship and come back to you again. We're going up to know that whatever happens up on that mountain, y'all won't see it. But when we come back, we will have worshiped. We will have worshiped God. And the two young men, knowing Abraham, having been raised in his camp, this, that, and the other, okay. They have no idea of what's going to happen. And Abraham, he typifies this when Isaac asks about the land. And Abraham says, God's got it. God will provide himself a lamb. It says, and they came to the place which God told him, verse 9. God told him about, and Abraham built the altar, built an altar there, and laid the wood in order. And he bound Isaac and laid him on the altar, on the wood. And Isaac says not a word. But Dad, you said God was going to provide a lamb. But no buts. No fussing, no fighting, no arguing, no kicking, no screaming. Obedience is rampant throughout this entire situation. God, Abraham obeying God, Isaac obeying Abraham submitting to what God said, Isaac submitting. All of this reflects, and I'll make up a word and say preflex, because it's before it all happens, Christ giving his life. It preflex Christ giving his life, because Christ did not utter a word in his defense. He didn't fight. He submitted to what had to be done. But Isaac, he he was bound, he was placed on the wood. Verse 10, and Abram stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. Abraham, Abraham, lay not thine hand on thy son. And it was Abraham's heart throughout. And it was his mindset throughout. That shows his commitment to the Lord. Because he purposed in his heart that he was going to obey and do what the Lord said do. God said to offer him as a burnt sacrifice, and he did everything. And he did everything as unto the Lord, which is why he said when we're going up to worship. If he had anything in his heart other than worshiping God, number one, he wouldn't have declared it down there. Number two, he would have gone up with that kind of, it's like the little kid that's threatening to run away from home. Doesn't really want to. They go upstairs. You know, they pack a bag. I'm leaving. I'm going. They get to the front door and nobody's moving. Nobody's saying anything. And they got their hand on the door. Okay, I'm about to go out. I'm leaving now. Nothing. And they might even go out and close the door behind them. That's it. I'm not coming back. No more. Then they go sit on the stairs and they wait to see if somebody's coming after them. And they're all their declaration and all I'm leaving. But what I really want in my heart is for, the opposite to happen. I want you to do this so that, but there was never any intention to do what it is you said you were going to do. But this is not the case with Abram. He's not trying to carry out steps to see where God's going to tell him to stop. He's not trying to just go through and with the hesitation of waiting for that final don't. He's not doing that. He's not doing, because in order to get to that place where Abraham was, to where he stretched out the knife, to where he was gonna do it, it was already done with the shot.
Yes.
He had purpose in his heart and in his mind,
Yes.
that it was already done. Because God said do it. Because God said do it. For as difficult as it was, there's nothing in here. We have to know and believe that there is a struggle going on inside Abraham. We have to know that there is a reluctance inside of Abraham to do this to his son. To do this to this promise that God gave him. But because God said do it, he was doing it. That's a test. That's a test. Tests are hard. Tests require fortitude. Tests require faith. Tests require difficult steps. Tests. So by the time Abraham gets his hand stretched to carry it out, he stretched forth his hand and he took the knife to slay his son. In his heart and in his mind, it was done. The willingness. There was no hesitation. There was no last prayer. Okay, God, I'm getting ready to do this. If you don't want me to do this, send me a sign. this was 100% obedience from the moment it was spoken. 100% obedience from the moment it was spoken. And regardless of what Abraham was feeling on the inside, reluctance, hesitation, obedience won out. Regardless of the emotions going on inside, worship outweighed everything else. Obedience and worship. Obedience and worship. Obedience and worship. Obedience and worship. And all of this was based on Abraham's experience with God. Typified in verse 8, my son, God will provide himself a lamb. God's got this. God's got this. Remember that. My God will provide himself a lamb. God's got this. God's got this. Remember that. And so, verse 13 says, Abraham lifted up his eyes, and he looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh, as it is said today, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Jireh. Whenever I think about that, and I've read the definition, and I didn't write it down this week for some reason, and I don't know why. But in the definition of Jehovah Jireh, and I've often made the reference myself that God is the place of provision. Jehovah Jireh, my provider. Jehovah Jireh. But when I look up the definition Jehovah Jireh, the first line of that definition is God will see to it. God will see to it. And that goes back to verse 8. My son, God will provide himself a lamb. God will see to it. God's got this. God's got you. God's got me. God's got us. God's got this situation. God will see to it. And because that just wasn't new revelation in that moment, that is why Abram could tell the young men while they waited, the lad and I will go yonder and worship. Because God will see to it. So if I have to slay thy son and burn him, God will see to it.
Yes.
No matter what has to happen up on that mountain, God will see to it. Jehovah Jireh, God will see to it. God's got this. God's got you. God's got me. God's got us. God's got this situation. God will see to it. So we're going to worship. I'm going to obey. We're going to worship. And then we'll be back. And it's that song. It's William McDowell. Here I am to worship. Here I am to worship. You know, where are we at? 3 times Abraham is addressed in this passage. Verse 1, verse 7, and verse 11. And all 3 times Abram answered. In verse 1, here I am, when God addressed him. In verse 7, when Isaac addressed him, here am I. In verse 11, when the angel of the Lord spoke from heaven, here am I. Here am I. In order to worship, in order to be in true obedience, you have to present yourself. You have to be in that. You have to give yourself. You have to present yourself.
Yes.
To be obedient. You have to present yourself in order to worship.
Yes, you That's good.
You gotta be there.
Yes. The worship I got.
And that's the significance
Here
of
am I.
these three responses. Whenever Abram is called, here am I.
Here am I.
Here am I. I'm not absentee in all of this.
My worship. Here am I.
Here am I.
Yes.
Here's my worship. Here am I.
Yes. Yes.
Go, Abram.
Yes.
Yes, Lord. Here am I. Here I am. Yeah. Here I am. Yeah. Not what.
Yes.
Huh? Here am I. Here am I. And he hasn't even received the command yet. Hasn't even received the command yet. But when Isaac is addressing him at a critical moment when he's gathered the wood and everything else, and now it's just about time, and Isaac has watched Abram do this over and over again. So Isaac knows, okay, it's about time for the sacrificial animal. But I don't see one. Father, where's the lamb? Where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Because he's seen Abraham do this over and over again. He's watched. And so now he sees it going down. He doesn't see the lamb. But Abraham responds, Jehovah Jireh, God will see to it. God will see to it. God will see to it. And then at the critical moment, when the knife is stretched and there's the only thing left to do is the act itself. Because it has to have been done in his heart and in his head already. Abraham, Abraham. Here am I. Here am I. Three responses. Here I am, here am I. Because he was in it for the Lord's glory. He was in it for worship. He was in it to obey. You can't be half in and half out and obey the way God wants us to obey.
Yes.
You cannot. We cannot do it. See, we can't fully worship God unless it starts with, here I am. Here am I. You read my notes. You just read my notes. Presenting ourselves as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable unto God, which is our reasonable service.
Yes.
Presenting ourselves. Here I am. Here am I. Romans 12:1. In Genesis, Abraham is living out Romans 12:1. He didn't have it to read it because he was living it. He was living it. He was demonstrating his faith.
Yes.
He's demonstrating his faith. 1 Samuel chapter 15 and verse 22. That's where Samuel is saying obedience is better than sacrifice. Look at this situation here where God is telling Abraham, sacrifice your son as a burnt offering. First Samuel is saying obedience to obey is better than sacrifice. Abraham is living 1 Samuel in Genesis. Obedience is better than sacrifice. Obedience is better than sacrifice. Obedience to obey is better than to sacrifice.
His obedience. His obedience. That sacrifice. Come on, Pastor.
It goes all the way back to Cain and Abel. It goes all the way back to Cain and Abel. Abel presented his sacrifice as prescribed, as demonstrated, as taught by Adam. Abel wanted to present the work of his hands. Cain wanted to present the work of his hands. The work of his hands. The work of his flesh. Abel was a tender of the sheep. It was the work of his hands. but it was a sacrifice. But it was obedient to the example that had already been set. Adam already had taught them how to do it because God gave him the example. Because an animal had to lose his life so that they could be covered by that skin. Adam goes on and teaches his sons, when we present an offering unto the Lord, it must be done in this manner. Abel does so in obedience. The command to sacrifice went forth. But Cain twisted it.
Okay.
He wasn't in full obedience.
Okay.
Because it wasn't just to sacrifice, it was to sacrifice flesh. It was to shed blood. Because what took place in the garden was an example of what would happen on the cross.
Yes. Blood. Yeah.
Cain wanted to sacrifice based on the work of his hands, based on the work of his flesh. So he thought he was obeying the command to sacrifice. But obedience is better than sacrifice. Obedience, if he was all about obedience, if he had said, here am I, here I am, if it was about that, then he would have obeyed the full command. He would obey every step of what was commanded, of what was taught, of what was demonstrated before him, because he did not come in with that worship of saying, here I am to worship, here am I to worship. Here am I to present myself, not as a living sacrifice, but as a substitute. Here I am doing it my way.
My way. There you go. I got you.
Here I am, I want to do it my way. Instead of doing it according to how it was taught, how it was demonstrated, how it was exemplified before him. Obedience is better than sacrifice.
Yes.
That's why James says, but be ye doers of the word. Do what the word says do, not just a hearer. It's not good enough just to hear. Cain heard. Cain heard, but Cain did not do what he was taught to do. He didn't do it to the fullest. He didn't do it by what was taught. But he did the word. Our responsibility, as Abraham demonstrates, is to listen, to obey, to heed, and do the word of God. It is throughout the word. It is incumbent upon us as believers, as God's children, to do the word. Be obedient. Be obedient. Don't look at the task you've been asked to do, because God will see to it. Don't look at what God is asking you to do. Look at God. Simply look at God and say, okay, open your eyes. Oh my, oh my. Present yourself as that living sacrifice. Stop looking at everything else that I'm going to lose. I'll stop looking at everything else that I don't want to have to lose. I don't want to have to lose. Present yourself as that living sacrifice, which is reasonable service. As parents, we know reasonable service. As parents, when we ask our children to do something, there's a reasonable expectation that they're going to do it. We're not asking them to build a house. We're not asking them to go build a car. We're not asking them to go clean the neighbor's house. We're not asking them to go sweep the street.
Yeah. Just reasonable.
Reasonable things. Reasonable things. God doesn't ask us anything out of reason.
He does not. Yes.
And I say that looking at the fact that God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac.
Yes.
Not an unreasonable request. And Abraham, in spite of everything that possibly could have been going on inside of him, purposed in his heart that he was going to do it. Didn't negotiate, didn't bargain, did not barter, did not question, did not hesitate, did not fleece, didn't do any of that. In fact, he got up early. Got up early to obey. Got up early. And in carrying it out, the only thing that he told anyone was that we're going to worship.
Yes.
That's all he told anybody. We're going to worship.
That's good.
I'll take that back. His other response to Isaac was, God will see to it. God will see to it.
Yes.
God will see to it. Verse 14, and Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh. He called the name of that place, God will see to it. God will see to it. He named the place after what he had already declared in verse 8. He named it after what he had already declared. He named it after the manifestation of the declaration. He named it after he claimed it. This is not name it and claim it, okay? That wasn't there. That's not what's going on here. But he named that place after the manifestation. He named that place. He named that place after the manifestation. And I just have to remember that way back in Genesis chapter 15 and verse 6. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. And he believed in the Lord because he believed in the Lord.
Yes.
See, we as believers do not walk around without knowledge of God. We don't walk around with lack of experience in who God is. He's done too much for us.
Yes, he has.
That's why we sing that song. When I think about the Lord, how he saved me, how he raised me, how he healed me, how he filled me, how he saved me, how he did all of those things.
Yes.
He picked me up, turned me around, he placed my feet on solid ground.
Yes.
And it makes me want to shout.
Yes.
But when situation or circumstance arise, we forget. Worse, we deny. We question. And that can't be counted as righteousness. That can't be counted to us as righteousness. But what can count against us, count to us for righteousness is believing in God. Believing in God. Believe that he can. Believe that God will see to it. Therein is the righteousness. Believing. Believing. If Abraham did not believe God to be who he was, he might have lost Isaac. He might have lost Isaac. But God knew his servant. And when he says in verse 12, Now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. He wasn't speaking because it was just a revelation. Because he just learned. Because, oh, now I see. But he was speaking because he says, now you have demonstrated. Because your actions matched your words. Because your attitude matched. Because you worshiped in your obedience. In that is the righteousness. In that is what God is seeking to do. All the things that he wants anybody to see in us, all the aspects of him that he wants people to see in us, comes in those difficult commands, comes in those times where it requires us to stand, where it requires us to go against the very thing that's inside us to do. It comes against, but we have to present ourselves to the Lord. We have to walk in obedience with a heart and a mindset to worship God for who he is, because we know who he is. Not in a familiarly contemptuous kind of way, because familiarity brings contempt, but God is not saying to be content, to be familiar with him, to know him in an intimate way. No way possible on earth we here in these bags of flesh that we can, that house our spirit, that house the Holy Spirit, can we know everything there is to know about God. Not possible. But what we do know of him from his word, what we do know of him from our experience with him, is enough for us to operate in love, in obedience unto righteousness, and to worship him for who he is, because he is who he is. We see that Abraham was living the word before it had a chance to be penned. He was living the word. But see, it wasn't impossible, and it's not an anomaly, because Genesis tells us in the beginning was the word, and the word was God, and the word was with God, right? So he wasn't inventing anything, he wasn't creating anything, he was simply living out the word. God visited upon him, God spoke to him directly. So he was just living it out, obeying the word. Like all of us, Abraham had his moments, but he didn't stay stuck in those moments. Yes, he fell, and it seemed he did the same thing over and over and over again, but it did not disqualify him from receiving Isaac. It did not disqualify him for being tested. In fact, he qualified to be tested. He qualified to be tested by God in that manner. He qualified to be tested regarding the fulfilling of the promise. Because Isaac was just the tip of the iceberg promise. Promise iceberg. He was just the beginning of it. He was the seed deposit for the rest of the promise. Because if Isaac does not come, the rest of the promise is moot. Abraham throughout that whole experience, didn't make it about himself. He made it about making himself available. Amen.